You're too naive to inherit anything meaningful, Olivia. Aunt Beatrice's voice cut through the lawyer's office like a knife. The other relatives shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, avoiding my eyes. I sat frozen, staring at the mahogany conference table where my father's will lay waiting to be read. My hands trembled in my lap as Beatrice continued her public humiliation. Honestly, Thomas, she said, addressing the lawyer with practiced authority, my brother knew she couldn't handle finances. She still doesn't understand how credit cards work. A few cousins snickered nervously. Uncle Warren cleared his throat, but said nothing in my defense. The lawyer, Mr. Thomas Pemberton, adjusted his glasses and glanced at me with something that might have been pity. Mrs. Caldwell, perhaps we should proceed with the reading? Beatrice waved her hand dismissively. Of course, of course. I just want everyone to understand the reality of the situation before we begin. She settled back in her chair with a satisfied smile, her designer handbag placed prominently on the table like a trophy. Mr. Pemberton opened the document, and my heart sank as I heard the words that would change everything. I hereby name Beatrice Caldwell as temporary executor of this estate. My name is Olivia Foster, and I'm 23 years old. I grew up right here in Portland, Oregon, where my father built his modest accounting firm from nothing. Before I continue with what happened that terrible afternoon, I want to ask you something. If you're watching this, please subscribe to my channel for more fascinating stories like this. What happened to me could happen to anyone, and sometimes the endings surprise us all. After the will reading ended, family members approached me with awkward condolences. They spoke in hushed tones, as if someone had died all over again. My cousin Philip touched my shoulder gently. I'm sorry, Liv. Maybe it's for the best, you know? Managing an estate is complicated work. Aunt Beatrice stood near the window, accepting congratulations from Uncle Warren and his wife. She glanced at me occasionally, with a look I couldn't quite read. Was it triumph? Satisfaction? Whatever it was, it made my stomach turn. Olivia, dear, Beatrice called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Don't worry about a thing. I'll take care of everything, just like I always took care of your father when he needed help. That night, alone in my small apartment, I remembered the conversation I'd had with my father 3 months before he died. We'd sat in his study, surrounded by financial books and old photographs. Dad had looked tired, but determined. Olivia, there's something important I need to tell you, he'd said, pulling out a locked metal box from his desk drawer. Inside were copies of documents I didn't recognize. Your Aunt Beatrice is going to think she's won when I'm gone. She's going to act like she owns everything. Why would you let her think that? I'd asked, confused. Dad had smiled sadly. Because the best way to catch someone doing wrong is to give them enough rope to hang themselves. I've set up safeguards, backup documents with a second lawyer. But you have to promise me something, sweetheart. You have to stay quiet and let her expose herself. Can you do that? I had promised, even though I hadn't fully understood. Now, sitting in my apartment with Dad's words echoing in my memory, I finally grasped his plan. He knew Beatrice would reveal her true nature if she thought she had power over me. The next few weeks were harder than I'd expected. I forced myself to act confused and helpless whenever Beatrice was around. At family gatherings, I asked simple questions about bank statements and investment accounts. Beatrice would sigh dramatically and explain things to me like I was a child. Olivia, sweetie, this is basic mathematics, she'd say in front of everyone. Your father may have indulged your simplicity, but real life requires actual knowledge. The other relatives would laugh uncomfortably or look away. No one defended me. Beatrice started treating me like her personal assistant. She'd call at odd hours, demanding I pick up documents or run errands. After all, she'd remind me, I'm managing your inheritance. The least you can do is help. But while I played the fool publicly, I was carefully documenting everything. Every rude comment, every condescending email, every unreasonable demand went into a folder on my laptop. I photographed receipts, saved text messages, and kept a detailed journal. Dad had taught me well. The first real warning sign came when I received the monthly trust statement. Dad had spent years teaching me how to read financial documents, sitting with me every month to review accounts together. Now that knowledge served me well. I noticed a transfer of $15,000 to an account I didn't recognize. The notation simply read, administrative expenses. But Dad had been clear in his instructions. Administrative expenses required documentation and shouldn't exceed $500 monthly. I immediately scanned the document and sent it to Mr. Harrison Fletcher, the second lawyer Dad had hired without Beatrice's knowledge. Mr. Fletcher had introduced himself to me a week after the funeral, exactly as Dad had arranged. Mr. Fletcher called me within an hour. "This is excellent, Olivia. This shows she's already overstepping her authority." "Should I confront her?" I asked nervously. "Absolutely not," he replied firmly. "Let her keep going. The more violations we document, the stronger our case becomes. Your father knew what he was doing. Trust the process." I hung up, my hands shaking. This was really happening. Beatrice was stealing from Dad's estate, just as he'd predicted. 2 days later, Beatrice invited me to lunch at an expensive downtown restaurant. She ordered wine and expensive appetizers, then smiled at me across the table. "Olivia, I've been thinking about your situation," she began, dabbing her lips with a cloth napkin. "You must be struggling financially without your father's support. So, I've decided to give you a monthly allowance. $1,500 should be enough for someone with your modest lifestyle, don't you think?" Other diners glanced our way as she spoke loudly enough for them to hear. She wanted an audience for her generosity. "That's very kind of you, Aunt Beatrice," I said quietly, playing my role perfectly. "It's what family does," she replied, loud enough for the neighboring table to hear. "Some of us understand responsibility." She handed me an envelope with cash inside. "There's this month's payment. I'll have it deposited directly going forward." Later, I forwarded Beatrice's email about the allowance to Mr. Fletcher. His response was immediate. She'd just violated Clause 7 of the trust. Beneficiaries cannot be given allowances from executors. She's treating estate funds like personal money. This is perfect. A month later, I was casually browsing real estate listings online when I saw something that made my blood run cold. Dad's old house, the one where I'd grown up, was listed for sale. The asking price was nearly $1 million. The trust documents explicitly stated that the family home couldn't be sold for at least 2 years after Dad's death. It was meant to give me time to decide if I wanted to keep it. Beatrice knew this because it had been discussed at the will reading. I called Mr. Fletcher immediately. "She's selling the house." "Are you certain?" he asked. "It's listed online. There's an open house this Sunday." "Go to the open house," Mr. Fletcher instructed. "Don't make a scene. Just observe and gather information. If possible, get copies of any paperwork." That Sunday, I walked through my childhood home pretending to be just another potential buyer. Beatrice was there, dressed in an expensive suit, bragging to visitors about the property's features. She saw me and her expression flickered with surprise, then annoyance. "Olivia, what are you doing here?" "Just looking," I said softly. "It's a beautiful house." She pulled me aside. "This is business, dear. Adults only." After the open house incident, things changed. Beatrice started spreading rumors about me through the family network. Suddenly, relatives who had been cordial became distant. Phone calls went unreturned. Holiday invitations stopped arriving. At Thanksgiving, I overheard Aunt Beatrice talking to Uncle Warren in the kitchen. "She's become so lazy and irresponsible since her father passed. Honestly, I'm doing her a favor by handling everything. She'd just waste it all." Cousin Philip, who had been kind before, now avoided me at family gatherings. When I tried to talk to him, he made excuses and walked away. I was being systematically isolated from everyone I'd known my whole life. The loneliness was crushing. Some nights, I'd sit in my apartment wondering if I should just give up, let Beatrice have everything and walk away. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was too naive for all this. But then I'd remember Dad's face, his trust in me, and his careful planning. He believed I was strong enough to see this through. I couldn't let him down. 3 months into Beatrice's reign as executor, my cousin Nina called me late one night. Nina was Beatrice's own daughter, and we'd been close growing up. "Liv, we need to talk," she whispered into the phone. "Can you meet me somewhere private?" We met at a coffee shop across town. Nina looked nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder. "My mother has been bragging about how she outsmarted Uncle Daniel. She doesn't know I can't hear her when she's on the phone with her financial advisor." My heart raced. What did she say? "She's planning to drain the trust accounts into her own investments. She thinks you're too stupid to notice." "She called you." Nina paused, looking pained. "She called you a naive little fool who'd never figure it out." "How much time do we have?" I asked. Nina bit her lip. "She's accelerating everything. She told her advisor she wants it done within 3 months, before anyone asks questions." "Liv, I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner, but she's my mother, and I was scared." I reached across the table and squeezed Nina's hand. "You're telling me now. That's what matters." My apartment dining table disappeared under piles of documents. Every email Beatrice had sent, every text message, every contract and receipt was printed, organized, and cross-referenced. Mr. Fletcher helped me build a timeline showing the escalating pattern of violations. There were unauthorized transfers totaling over $70,000. The illegal house listing with a signed agreement. Emails where Beatrice referred to estate funds as my money. Text messages where she admitted spending trust funds on personal investments. "This is overwhelming," I told Mr. Fletcher during one of our meetings. "It's all so perfect," he replied, spreading the documents across his desk. "Your father predicted she'd be reckless if she thought she'd gotten away with it. This level of documentation is exactly what we need." 2 days later, Beatrice called requesting a private meeting. "We need to discuss your future, Olivia. My office, tomorrow at 2. I agreed, my stomach churning with anxiety. But I also felt a strange sense of calm. Everything was falling into place, just as Dad had planned. Beatrice's office was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, expensive art hung on the walls, and her desk was positioned to make visitors feel small. She gestured for me to sit in a low chair while she remained standing. "Olivia, I want to talk about trust," she began, pacing slowly. "Your father trusted me more than anyone. More than you, honestly. He knew I had the experience and wisdom to handle his legacy properly." She moved closer, her voice dropping. "Now, I need you to trust me too. There are some documents I need you to sign. Just formalities, really. Legal protections that will make everything cleaner." I pretended to consider her words carefully. "What kind of documents?" "Nothing complicated. Just agreements that confirm I'm managing things appropriately. It protects both of us." She slid a folder across her desk toward me. "Can I have my lawyer look at them first?" I asked innocently. Her eyes flashed with annoyance. "You don't have a lawyer, Olivia. And, honestly, paying legal fees would just waste your inheritance. Just sign them now, and we can move forward." I noticed the small recording device I'd placed on the bookshelf earlier, hidden behind a photo frame. "I'll think about it," I said softly. Mr. Fletcher's hands shook with anger as he read through the documents Beatrice had tried to get me to sign. "This is criminal," he said flatly. "These papers would have stripped away every protection your father put in place for you. She would have had complete control over everything, permanently." "What would have happened if I'd signed?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "You would have given up your rights to contest anything she did. She could have emptied every account, sold every property, and you'd have no legal recourse. Your father's entire estate would have become hers to do with as she pleased." I felt sick, and I almost signed it. "But you didn't," Mr. Fletcher reminded me firmly. "You did exactly what your father taught you to do. You questioned, you waited, you verified. That's not naivety, Olivia. That's wisdom." Over the next week, Beatrice called me repeatedly, asking about the documents. Her tone shifted from sweet to impatient to barely concealed anger. I made excuses about being busy, about needing time to think, about wanting to understand everything fully. With each delay, she grew more suspicious. I could hear it in her voice, see it in the terse text messages she sent. The confrontation happened at Uncle Warren's birthday party. Beatrice cornered me in the hallway, her face flushed with wine and frustration. "You're playing games with me, Olivia," she hissed, her carefully maintained composure cracking. "I've been patient with your little act, but my patience has limits." "I don't understand what you mean," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Don't play stupid with me. Those documents should have been signed weeks ago. If you don't cooperate, I'll have you cut off completely. No more allowance, no more family, nothing. You'll be alone." For the first time since this began, I saw real panic in her eyes. She was realizing that I might not be as controllable as she'd thought. "I just want to understand everything," I said quietly. "You don't need to understand," she snapped. "You just need to do what you're told. Your father may have indulged your naivety, but I won't. Sign the papers by Friday or face the consequences." She stormed off, leaving me shaking in the hallway. But I wasn't shaking from fear. I was shaking from anger, from the confirmation of everything Dad had warned me about. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. Beatrice used $200,000 from the trust fund to invest in her friend's restaurant venture. The transaction was clearly marked in the monthly statement, with a note claiming it was a strategic estate investment. Mr. Fletcher's voice was tight, with controlled fury, when he called. "This is it, Olivia. This is the turning point we've been waiting for. Trust funds cannot be used for speculative business investments. This is a clear, undeniable violation of fiduciary duty." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we file for an emergency hearing. We present all the evidence we've gathered, we show the pattern of abuse, and we petition to have her removed as executor. Your father's backup provisions will go into effect." My hands trembled as I held the phone. "How long will it take?" "The hearing is scheduled for 3 weeks from now. Can you hold on that long?" I thought about Dad, about his careful planning, about how far we'd come. "Yes," I said firmly. "I can hold on." The next morning, I received the official notice. We were going to court. Everything Dad had prepared for was about to happen. Beatrice threw a party at her house the weekend before the court hearing. She called it a celebration of family unity, but everyone knew what it really was. She was celebrating what she thought was her final victory over me. I received an invitation, surprisingly. Maybe she wanted to rub salt in the wound, or maybe she genuinely believed I was too naive to realize what was happening. Either way, I decided to attend. The house was full of relatives I hadn't seen in months. They congratulated Beatrice on successfully managing the estate during such a difficult time. Uncle Warren gave a toast praising her dedication and wisdom. No one mentioned me except to express pity. Beatrice stood in the center of her living room, wearing expensive jewelry I suspected had been purchased with estate funds. She caught my eye across the room and raised her glass in a mock toast. Her smile was triumphant and cruel. I smiled back politely and sipped my water. In 3 days, that smile would be gone forever. The courthouse was intimidating, all marble columns and echoing hallways. Beatrice arrived with her expensive lawyer, looking confident in a designer suit. She barely glanced at me as we waited for the hearing to begin. Mr. Fletcher had prepared me for what to expect, but nothing could have prepared me for the moment we entered the courtroom. Judge Patricia Brennan sat behind the bench, her expression neutral and professional. "This is a preliminary hearing regarding the Foster estate," she announced. "Mrs. Caldwell, you've been serving as temporary executor. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Beatrice replied smoothly. "I've been honored to serve my late brother's wishes." "Mr. Fletcher, you've filed a petition to remove Mrs. Caldwell from this position. Please present your preliminary evidence." What happened next shocked everyone in the courtroom. Mr. Fletcher presented a document summary showing transfers totaling over $300,000, the illegal house listing, the attempted rights waiver, and dozens of other violations. The judge's eyebrows rose steadily as she reviewed each item. "This is highly irregular," Judge Brennan said, looking directly at Beatrice. "I'm ordering a full investigation into the management of this estate, effective immediately." Beatrice's face went pale. The courthouse conversation spread through the family like wildfire. Relatives who had shunned me started reaching out, asking questions, expressing concern. Old text messages and emails resurfaced, ones where Beatrice had been careless about what she'd said to different family members. Uncle Warren called me, his voice heavy with regret. "Olivia, I need to apologize. I should have questioned things more. I should have protected you like your father would have wanted." Nina visited my apartment with her own collection of evidence. "I've been keeping records too," she admitted. "I knew what my mother was doing wasn't right, but I was too scared to act." These are emails where she admitted to using estate money for personal expenses. Even cousin Philip showed up, shamefaced and apologetic. "She told us you were irresponsible, that you'd waste everything." I'm sorry I believed her without checking the facts. The family narrative was collapsing, and Beatrice knew it. She hired a more aggressive attorney, one known for intimidation tactics and courtroom theatrics. The real battle was about to begin. Beatrice's new strategy was simple: destroy my credibility completely. Her lawyer filed papers claiming I had manipulated Dad when he was elderly and vulnerable, that I had isolated him from his family, that every safeguard he'd put in place was the result of my undue influence. She brought witnesses to depositions. People who barely knew Dad suddenly remembered conversations where he'd expressed concern about my immaturity. Former neighbors testified about how I'd controlled his social calendar. It was all carefully orchestrated lies, but it was also terrifying. I sat through hours of hostile questioning. Beatrice's lawyer was merciless, twisting every answer, making my love for Dad sound like manipulation, making my care for him sound like control. "Isn't it true that you convinced your father to cut his own sister out of his will?" the lawyer demanded. "No," I replied firmly. "That's not true." "But you benefited from that decision, didn't you?" "I benefited from my father's love and trust," I answered. "That's not the same thing as manipulation." Just when I thought I couldn't take any more, Mr. Fletcher stood up. "Your Honor, I'd like to introduce evidence that will settle this matter definitively." The courtroom fell silent as Mr. Fletcher presented Dad's journal. It was a leather-bound book I'd seen him writing in during his final months, but I'd never read it. Apparently, he'd left it with Mr. Fletcher for exactly this moment. Judge Brennan read selected passages aloud. "Beatrice called again today, pressuring me to change my estate plans. She doesn't think I notice how she eyes my properties, my accounts. She's never forgiven me for building something she couldn't control." Another entry. "I'm setting up protections for Olivia. Not because she's naive, as Beatrice keeps suggesting, but because she's kind. In this world, people often mistake kindness for weakness. I won't let that happen to my daughter." The judge continued reading, each entry painting a clear picture of Beatrice's true nature and Dad's careful planning. There were dated entries describing her visits, where she'd pushed him to name her as primary beneficiary, her anger when he refused, her subtle threats about family loyalty. But the most powerful evidence came next. Mr. Fletcher played audio recordings Dad had made during his final months. His voice filled the courtroom, clear and determined despite his illness. "If you're hearing this, it means everything has gone according to plan. Beatrice has exposed herself, and Olivia has stayed strong. I'm proud of you, sweetheart." Under questioning, Beatrice's composure finally shattered. The financial expert Mr. Fletcher hired had gone through every transaction, exposing a pattern of self-dealing that was impossible to deny. "Mrs. Caldwell, did you or did you not use estate funds to invest in Riverside Restaurant Group?" the expert asked. "That was a legitimate investment opportunity," Beatrice stammered. "An opportunity where you became a 20% owner using your brother's money?" That was meant to grow the estate. "And these transfers to an account in your daughter's name? Were those meant to grow the estate as well?" Beatrice's lawyer tried to object, tried to redirect, but it was too late. The numbers didn't lie, and Beatrice's explanations contradicted themselves at every turn. She'd been so confident in her intelligence, so certain of my naivety, that she'd left a trail even a child could follow. By the end of her testimony, Beatrice was crying, her makeup ruined, her designer suit rumpled. The powerful, controlled woman who had humiliated me at the will reading was gone, replaced by someone desperate and cornered. Judge Brennan announced she would review all evidence and issue her final ruling within 1 week. That week was the longest of my life. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat properly. I kept replaying every moment, every decision, wondering if I'd done enough, if Dad's plan would work, if justice would actually prevail. Memories of caring for Dad flooded back. The nights I'd sat by his bed reading to him. The afternoons we'd spent reviewing financial documents together, him patiently teaching me everything he knew. The morning he'd taken my hand and made me promise to be strong. "You're stronger than you know, Olivia," he'd whispered. "Beatrice will underestimate you because you're kind. She thinks kindness means weakness. Prove her wrong." I thought about all the times I'd doubted myself, wondered if I should just give up and let Beatrice win. Those moments of weakness now felt like tests I'd somehow passed. Nina called every day to check on me. "Whatever happens, you did the right thing," she assured me. "You stood up for what was right, even when it was hard." On the 6th day, Mr. Fletcher called. "The judge is ready to issue her ruling. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Are you ready?" Was I ready? I didn't know, but I would be there. The courtroom looked exactly the same as it had weeks ago, but everything felt different. Beatrice sat with her lawyer, looking smaller somehow, her usual confidence dimmed. Family members filled the gallery, including Uncle Warren, Nina, and Philip. They'd come to witness the conclusion of this painful chapter. Judge Brennan entered, and we all stood. My heart hammered so hard I thought everyone could hear it. This was it. All of Dad's planning, all of my patience, everything came down to this moment. "Please be seated," the judge said, settling behind her bench. She looked at both parties carefully before speaking. "This has been one of the most clear-cut cases of executor misconduct I've encountered in my career." Beatrice's lawyer started to speak, but the judge raised her hand for silence. "I've reviewed every document, every recording, every piece of evidence presented. The pattern of abuse is undeniable. Mr. Foster's foresight in creating safeguards was both unusual and, as it turns out, entirely necessary." Mr. Fletcher squeezed my hand under the table. The judge cleared her throat and reached for the final document. "I hereby order the following," Judge Brennan announced, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom. "First, Beatrice Caldwell is immediately removed as executor of the Foster estate, effective today. Second, the backup provisions established by Daniel Foster are now activated, making Olivia Foster the primary beneficiary and administrator of the estate." Beatrice made a small sound, like air escaping a balloon. "Third, Mrs. Caldwell is ordered to return all improperly transferred funds within 30 days, totaling $347,000. Fourth, Mrs. Caldwell's personal inheritance, as outlined in the original will, is reduced to the symbolic amount of $1,000 due to her breach of fiduciary duty." The judge looked directly at Beatrice. "You abused your brother's trust and attempted to defraud his daughter. Your actions were calculated, deliberate, and cruel. This court will not reward such behavior." Finally, Judge Brennan continued, "The house sale is immediately canceled, and all estate properties are transferred to Miss Foster's control. Do you understand these rulings, Mrs. Caldwell?" Beatrice's face had turned a deep, burning red. She looked like she wanted to speak, to argue, to scream, but no words came out. Her expensive lawyer whispered something to her, and she nodded numbly. What happened next would stay with me forever. Beatrice stood up, her face that impossible shade of red, her hands shaking. For a moment, I thought she might try to maintain her dignity and leave quietly. Instead, she turned to me, her eyes blazing with a mixture of rage and humiliation. "You ungrateful little fool," she spat. "After everything I did for your father, for this family, you manipulated him. You turned everyone against me, you." "Mrs. Caldwell, that is enough," Judge Brennan interrupted sharply. "One more outburst and you'll be held in contempt." But Beatrice couldn't stop. Years of carefully maintained composure shattered completely. "You don't deserve any of this. You're just a naive child who got lucky. Your father was a fool to trust you." Her lawyer grabbed her arm, trying to pull her toward the exit. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as this powerful woman, who had controlled and manipulated everyone around her, fell apart completely. Uncle Warren looked away, embarrassed. Nina was crying quietly. Other family members stared in shock, seeing Beatrice's true nature fully revealed. As her lawyer finally managed to escort her out, the judge looked at me. "Miss Foster, would you like to make a statement?" I stood slowly, my legs shaking. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of Beatrice's fading sobs in the hallway. I looked at the faces of my family members, some guilty, some supportive, all waiting to hear what I would say. "Thank you, Your Honor," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "I want to thank my father first and foremost. He taught me that patience isn't weakness, that kindness isn't naivety, and that doing the right thing is worth fighting for, even when it's hard." I glanced toward the door, where Beatrice had disappeared. I don't hate my aunt. I pity her. She spent so much energy trying to prove I was too naive to handle responsibility that she never stopped to consider whether she was wise enough to handle it herself. Uncle Warren wiped his eyes. Nina smiled through her tears. "My father's estate will be used to establish scholarship funds for young people who've lost parents. Dad always believed in education and second chances. That's his legacy, not the money itself." I looked at each family member in turn. To those who doubted me or believed Aunt Beatrice's lies, I forgive you. To those who stood by me, especially Nina, thank you. And to my father, wherever you are, I hope I made you proud. As I walked out of the courtroom, the morning sun streamed through the tall windows. I felt lighter than I had in months. Free. They thought kindness meant weakness. My father taught me it meant patience. And patience, in the end, revealed the truth.